You made me spill my drink, old man, the massive seal growled, looming over him. The dive bar went silent. The old man in the faded red shirt didn't flinch. He just looked bored. I'm waiting for an apology, the seal pressed, stepping closer. Do you know what I do for a living? The old man smiled, but his eyes remained cold. I know exactly what you are. You're a tourist in a world I built. Who are you supposed to be? The young man scoffed. They didn't call me a badass, the old man whispered. They called me Cyclone. The seal went pale. His glass slipped and shattered on the floor. Where are you watching this story from? Let us know in the comments. If this journey of valor touched you, consider subscribing to Silent Veterans and help us give a voice to more incredible stories of our silent veterans. You need to check your perimeter, old-timer, before you get hurt. The voice boomed, thick with false bravado and cheap bourbon. Arthur Vance didn't flinch. He didn't even look up from the condensation dripping down the side of his glass. He just sat there, a statue in a red button-down shirt, while the bass of the club music thumped against his ribcage like a secondary heartbeat. The drop zone was alive tonight. It was a Friday near Fort Liberty, which meant the air was 80% testosterone, 10% perfume, and 10% potential violence. It was a place for wolves to howl at the neon moon. Arthur knew he looked like a sheep in this den, a 76-year-old grandfather who had taken a wrong turn on the way to a bingo hall. I'm talking to you, Red. The voice came again, closer this time. A heavy hand clamped onto Arthur's shoulder. Arthur sighed, the sound lost in the roar of the crowd. He slowly set his water glass down on the sticky coaster. He rotated his shoulder, a subtle, fluid movement that dislodged the hand without visible effort. I heard you the first time, son, Arthur said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise with a strange, dry clarity. It sounded like boots crunching on gravel. He finally turned on the bar stool. Standing over him was a mountain of a man. The kid couldn't have been more than 25, wearing a tight green t-shirt that strained against biceps the size of cured hams. He had the high and tight haircut, the aggressive posture of a man who had just earned his trident and thought the world owed him a salute. Behind him, 3 other young men in similar shirts snickered, their phones already raised, recording. You bumped into me, the young giant, Bricks, they called him, said, pointing a thick finger at a puddle of beer on the floor. You made me spill my draft. That's a party foul, Pops. In this bar, you spill it, you lick it up. The crowd nearby quieted. The music seemed to recede into the background, creating a vacuum of tension around the bar. This was the entertainment, the alpha eating the weak. Arthur looked at the beer puddle, then up at Bricks. He didn't stand up yet. He just analyzed the threat with eyes that had seen things Bricks had only watched in movies. You backed into me while you were flexing for the girls at the high top, Arthur said evenly. Gravity did the rest. Bricks' face flushed a darker shade of red. The laughter behind him stopped. He stepped into Arthur's personal space, looming over him. You got a smart mouth for a civilian, Bricks spat. Do you know where you are? This is the drop zone. This is for warriors, not for tourists wearing bright red shirts like they're asking for target practice. Bricks grabbed the collar of Arthur's red shirt, bunching the fabric. See? Bright red? Like a target. You're lucky I don't put a round downrange right now. It was a mistake. Arthur's hand moved. It didn't strike. It simply came up and rested gently on Bricks' wrist. The grip looked frail, wrinkly skin over old bone, but when Arthur squeezed, Bricks gasped. The young seal's eyes went wide. It felt like his wrist was being crushed by a hydraulic press. Let go of the shirt, Arthur whispered. Bricks let go, stumbling back a half step, rubbing his wrist in confusion. The phone cameras were steady now, zooming in. The narrative was shifting. The old man wasn't cowering. Who do you think you are? Bricks stammered, his ego bruising faster than his wrist. He tried to recover his dominance, puffing his chest out again. I'm an operator. I hunt bad guys in the dark. What did you ever do? Sell insurance? Fix toilets? Arthur stood up then. He wasn't tall, maybe 5'9" on a good day, but he unfolded himself with a kind of grim dignity that made him seem 10 feet tall. He smoothed the front of his red shirt. I did my job, Arthur said. So you could do yours? Brix laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Oh, here we go. The I serve too speech, let me guess. Clerk typist? Supply sergeant? Did you get a paper cut for your country? Brix leaned in, his face inches from Arthur's weather-beaten nose. Come on, Hutba hero. What was your call sign? Did the boys call you Speedy? Gramps? Paper pusher? Arthur stared at the young man. For a second, the neon lights of the bar reflected in Arthur's eyes, turning them into pools of fire. He reached down with his left hand and touched his right wrist. There was a silver bracelet there, a POW MIA band. The metal was scratched, worn smooth by 50 years of worry, the name etched into it almost illegible. Arthur's thumb rubbed the cold silver, back and forth, back and forth. They didn't call me Speedy, Arthur said softly. What? Brix jeered. Speak up. They called me Cyclone, Arthur said. The word hung in the air, heavier than the humidity in the room. Brix blinked. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Cyclone? What? Like the weather? Or because you blow a lot of hot air? Arthur didn't hear the rest of the insult. His thumb pressed hard against the silver bracelet. The sensation of the cold metal against his pulse acted as a key, unlocking a door he kept double-bolted in the back of his mind. The smells of the bar, stale beer, lime, cheap cologne, vanished instantly. The pounding bass of the speaker system warped, twisting into a low, rhythmic thwup thwup thwup. The neon lights dissolved into a blinding white mist. The floor under his boots turned to mud. The air temperature spiked to 100 degrees, thick with the copper tang of blood and the sulfur stench of burning cordite. Arthur wasn't in North Carolina anymore. He was back in the Ashau Valley, and the cyclone was about to touch down. The humidity hit him first, a physical weight that pressed against his chest like a wet wool blanket. The smell of cheap cologne was gone, replaced by the pungent, earthy stench of rotting vegetation and the sharp, metallic taste of fear. Arthur wasn't holding a water glass anymore. His hands were wrapped around the spade grips of an M60 machine gun, a Shaw Valley, May, 1968. Coming in hot, watch the tree line. The pilot's voice crackled over the headset, tinny and strained. Arthur leaned out the open door of the UH-1 Huey, the wind whipping his face, stinging his eyes. Below them, the jungle was a sea of emerald green, beautiful and deadly. Somewhere under that canopy, a 6-man Green Beret reconnaissance team was being chewed up by an entire NVA battalion. I see green smoke, the co-pilot shouted. 3 o'clock low. Roger, Arthur muttered, clicking his mic. He racked the charging handle of the M60. Get us down, Lieutenant. I'll keep the heads down. The Huey banked hard, the G-force pushing Arthur back against his safety harness. The thwup, thwup, thwup of the rotors grew deafening as they descended into the bowl of the valley. It was like descending into the throat of a monster. Then the jungle erupted. It didn't start with a bang. It started with the sound of hail on a tin roof. Plink, plink, crack. Taking fire. 3 o'clock. 9 o'clock. Everywhere. Tracers zipped past the open door like angry hornets, glowing green against the dark foliage. Arthur squeezed the trigger. The M60 roared to life, a heavy, rhythmic chugging that shook his entire skeleton. Brass casings spewed from the ejection port, cascading onto the metal floor like a golden waterfall. Get some. Get some. He walked his fire along the tree line, shredding leaves, branches, and earth. He saw bodies drop, shadowy figures in khaki uniforms crumpling into the tall grass, but there were too many of them. The muzzle flashes from the jungle floor looked like a carpet of fireflies. We're taking heavy hits, the pilot screamed. Hydraulics are sluggish. I can't hold her steady. Don't pull out, Arthur roared over the comms, his voice raw. They're right there. We have to get them. He could see the Green Berets now. 6 men, huddled back-to-back in a small clearing, surrounded by a closing ring of enemy soldiers. One of them was dragging a wounded buddy. They were waving frantically. The Huey hovered 10 feet off the deck, wobbling like a drunkard. Crack. The sound was different this time. Louder. Closer. The plexiglass windshield of the cockpit exploded inward. A spray of red mist painted the inside of the cabin. The pilot's head snapped back, his helmet shattering. "Jimmy!" the co-pilot screamed, grabbing the collective. But it was too late. The Huey lurched violently to the right. The tail rotor had clipped a tree branch. The bird began to spin. It wasn't a gentle rotation. It was a violent, nausea-inducing whip. The world outside became a blur of green and brown. The centrifugal force was immense, pinning Arthur against the doorframe. If not for the monkey strap securing him to the airframe, he would have been flung out into the killing zone. "We're going down! Brace! Brace!" the co-pilot yelled. But they didn't crash. Not yet. The co-pilot was fighting the stick, trying to keep them airborne, but the tail rotor was gone. The helicopter became a spinning top, rotating wildly, drifting just feet above the heads of the surrounded Green Berets. The NVA saw the wounded bird and surged forward. Hundreds of them. They rushed the clearing, bayonets fixed, sensing blood. In that moment, Arthur Vance stopped being a man. He stopped feeling fear. He stopped thinking about home, or the girl waiting for him in Tennessee. As the helicopter spun faster and faster, Arthur locked his boots against the skid. He didn't let go of the trigger. Because the helicopter was spinning, Arthur had a 360-degree field of fire. He didn't need to aim. He just needed to pour lead. "Feed me," he screamed at the crew chief behind him. "Feed the belt." The M60 became an extension of his will. As the Huey whipped around, Arthur held the trigger down. The tracer round spiraled outward from the spinning helicopter like water from a sprinkler, creating a solid circle of death. From the ground, it must have looked like a tornado of fire, a cyclone of red tracers. Rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat. The barrel of the gun glowed cherry red. The heat radiated into Arthur's face and singing his eyebrows. He ignored it. He swept the jungle in a continuous, unbroken arc. The enemy soldiers running toward the clearing ran straight into the wall of lead. They fell in waves, cut down like wheat before a scythe. "Keep spinning her," Arthur yelled into the comms, laughing maniacally, the adrenaline poisoning his brain. "Keep her spinning, Lieutenant. I've got them all. I've got them all." He fired until the barrel smoked white. He fired until the vibration made his hands bleed inside his gloves. He fired until the ammo belt ran dry, and then he screamed for the reserve box. The sheer volume of fire created an impenetrable barrier around the trapped team. No one could get through the Cyclone. The co-pilot finally managed to wrestle the spinning beast back up, gaining altitude, spinning, spinning, spinning into the sky. As they rose, Arthur kept shooting, raining brass and lead down upon the valley until they punched through the cloud layer. Only then did he release the trigger. The silence that followed was louder than the gunfire. Arthur slumped back against the bulkhead, his chest heaving, his lungs burning. He looked down at his hands. They were locked into claws, frozen in the shape of the grips. His flight suit was soaked in sweat and hydraulic fluid. The crew chief crawled over, eyes wide, face pale as a ghost. He looked at the smoking gun, then at Arthur. "Jesus Christ, Artie," the chief whispered, his voice trembling. "You turned this bird into a blender. You wiped them out. All of them." Arthur looked out at the peaceful white clouds drifting by. He felt the cold silver of the bracelet on his wrist, vibrating against his pulse. "Did we get them?" Arthur rasped. "The team? Did we get them?" "Yeah." The co-pilot's voice came over the headset, sounding broken. "We got 'em. They grabbed the skids when we dipped. They're hanging on. You saved them, Vance. You saved every single one of them." Arthur closed his eyes. The adrenaline crashed, leaving him hollow. He wasn't Arthur anymore. In the fire of the Ashau Valley, Arthur had burned away. Only the Cyclone remained. The sound of the rotor blades faded, replaced by the thumping bass of the drop zone. The smell of burning jungle rot dissolved back into the scent of spilled lager. Arthur blinked, the memory receding like a tide, leaving him stranded back on the bar stool. His thumb was still pressing hard against the silver bracelet. His heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs, the only physical evidence of where he had just been. The bar was silent. "Bricks." The young SEAL was staring at him. He looked confused. The arrogance was still there, but it was cracking. You spacing out on me, old man? Bricks laughed nervously, looking back at his friends for support. I asked you if Cyclone was some kind of weather joke. Cat got your tongue. Arthur slowly took his hand off his wrist. He looked at his hand. It was trembling slightly, the nerve damage from the recoil all those years ago. It wasn't a joke, Arthur said, his voice quiet, lacking the energy it had a moment ago. He felt tired, infinite fatigue. It was a long time ago. Forget it. Enjoy your beer, son. Arthur turned to leave. He didn't want to fight. He just wanted to go home. Whoa, hold on, Brick said, stepping in front of him, blocking his path. You don't just drop a call sign like that and walk away. You're stealing valor, aren't you? You bought that bracelet at a surplus store. You never served. Bricks poked Arthur's chest. You're a fraud. Slam. The sound of a hand hitting the bar top echoed like a gunshot. Every head turned. The bartender, an older man with a gray crew cut and a prosthetic hook for a left-handee, had vaulted over the bar. He wasn't looking at Arthur. He was looking at Bricks with a mixture of fury and disgust. Take your hand off him, Miller, the bartender growled. Stay out of this, Gunny, Bricks snapped. I'm exposing a fake. This guy claims, I know what he claims, the bartender interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. And if you touch him again, I will personally drag you out of here and beat you until you can't remember your own rank. Why? Bricks scoffed. Who is he? Your dad? No, a new voice said. The crowd parted. A man in a dark suit had been sitting in the shadows of a back booth. He stood up now. He was older, perhaps 70, walking with a cane. He moved stiffly, but with authority. He walked into the circle of light, right up to Bricks. He looked at the young SEAL, then turned his eyes to Arthur. The man in the suit dropped his cane. It clattered to the floor. He stood as straight as his spine would allow. He slowly raised his right hand to his brow, palm flat, fingers rigid, a perfect, trembling salute. Sir, the man in the suit said, his voice thick with emotion. Arthur looked at the man. He squinted. The face was lined with age, the hair white, but the eyes. He knew those eyes. Jordan Kowalski, Arthur whispered. It's General Kowalski now, Artie. The man smiled, tears welling in his eyes. But yeah, it's me. The general turned to Bricks, who was now looking pale. Are you asked for his call sign? The general said, his voice booming through the quiet bar. You think it's a joke? You think it's cute? The general pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. This man is the only reason I am alive, the only reason my children were born, the only reason my grandchildren exist. The general reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a tattered, black and white photograph. He slammed it onto the table next to Bricks's spilled beer. It was a picture of a helicopter, riddled with holes, looking like Swiss cheese, and standing next to it, a young Arthur Vance, shirtless, covered in soot, looking like a demon of war. We were surrounded in the Aishao, the general recounted, addressing the entire room. 400 NVA against 6 of us. We were dead, and then the cyclone came down. He looked at Bricks. He strapped himself to the skid of a spinning bird and rained fire for 20 minutes straight. He took 3 rounds to the leg and didn't stop shooting. He cut down a forest to get us out. The general picked up Arthur's hand, the one with the bracelet. This bracelet, the general choked out. He wears it for the pilot who didn't make it back that day. He's worn it for 56 years. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. Bricks looked at the photo. He looked at the general. And then, slowly, he looked at the old man in the red shirt. The target. The color drained from Bricks' face. The aggression evaporated, replaced by a sudden, crushing realization of his own smallness. He had just tried to bully a living legend. Bricks stammered. I didn't know. That's the problem with your generation, Arthur said gently, breaking the tension. He picked up the general's cane and handed it back to him. You think the history of the Navy started the day you enlisted. Arthur looked at Bricks. Not with anger, but with pity. You don't need to apologize to me, son, Arthur said. But you owe the general a drink. The silence in the drop zone was no longer awkward. It was heavy, a tangible weight that pressed against the chest of every man and woman in the room. It was the weight of history. Bricks, Petty Officer Miller, stood frozen. The color had not returned to his face. He looked down at the black and white photograph on the table, then up at the old man in the red shirt, and finally at the general who had just undressed his ego in front of 50 witnesses. The arrogance that had armored Miller just minutes ago lay shattered on the floor, right next to the broken glass of his spilled beer. Miller started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat, trying to find the baritone command he usually projected, but all he found was the trembling tone of a recruit. I didn't know, Chief. I had no idea. Arthur sighed. The adrenaline of the flashback was fading, leaving his joints aching and his hands tired. He reached out and touched the edge of the photograph, his finger brushing the face of the young man in the cockpit, the pilot who hadn't come home. You weren't supposed to know, Arthur said softly. That's the point, son. Arthur looked around the bar. The phones were down now. The recording had stopped. The crowd was watching with a kind of reverent hush. You boys come in here, Arthur continued, his voice gaining a little strength, with your tridents fresh on your chests, and you think you invented valor. You think because you have the gear, and the training and the movies made about you, that you own the franchise on courage. He looked Miller in the eye. But the tridents don't make you warriors, Arthur said. The sacrifice makes you warriors. And the men who sacrifice the most, they don't talk about it in bars. They don't demand apologies. They don't wear it like a costume. Arthur tapped the silver POWOWMIA bracelet on his wrist. They carry it. In silence. Miller swallowed hard. He looked at his own friends, the green shirts, who had been snickering earlier. They were looking at the floor, unable to meet Arthur's gaze. The shame was absolute. Miller took a breath. He stepped back, giving Arthur space, and then did something that surprised the room. He didn't argue. He didn't try to save face. He grabbed a rag from the counter and knelt down. In front of the entire bar, the massive Navy SEAL got on one knee and began to wipe up the beer he had spilled near Arthur's boots. It was a gesture of supreme humility, a public act of redemption. When the floor was dry, Miller stood up. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked only at Arthur. Gunny, Miller called out to the bartender, his voice steady now. A bottle of Louis XIII. On my tab. The room gasped. That was a $4,000 bottle of cognac. The bartender nodded, a grim smile of approval on his face. He placed the crystal bottle and 3 glasses on the bar. Miller poured 3 shots with shaking hands. He pushed one toward Arthur, one toward General Kowalski, and he held the third. I can't take back the disrespect, Chief, Miller said, his eyes wet. But I can pay the respect now. To the Cyclone, and to the men in that valley. Arthur looked at the amber liquid. He didn't drink immediately. He picked up the glass, held it up to the light, and then slowly, deliberately, poured the contents onto the floor. For Jimmy, Arthur whispered. General Kowalski nodded solemnly and did the same. For the crew, Miller hesitated, then poured his own glass out. For the fallen, it was a peace offering, a bridge built over the gap of generations. Arthur finally offered a small, tired smile. He reached out and patted Miller on the shoulder, the same shoulder he had almost crushed earlier. You've got a lot of muscle, kid, Arthur said. Make sure your character is stronger than your biceps. That's the only legacy that lasts. Arthur turned to the general. Good to see you, sir, but I think it's past my bedtime. My wife worries if I'm not back before the news ends. I'll walk you out, Cyclone, the general said. As Arthur Vance turned to leave, picking up his water glass to bus his own table out of habit, Miller stopped him. Leave it, Chief, Miller said. I've got the watch. Arthur nodded. He straightened his red shirt, turned, and walked toward the exit. As he passed the tables, a strange thing happened. It started with the old bikers in the back, but it spread quickly. Men stood up. No one saluted. That would have been too formal, too stiff. Instead, they just stood. They nodded. They made eye contact. a silent ripple of honor following the old man to the door. When the heavy wooden door of the drop zone closed behind him, the music didn't start back up immediately. The bartender took a roll of masking tape and walked over to the stool where Arthur had been sitting. He ripped off a piece of tape and slapped it onto the leather. He grabbed a marker and wrote 2 words on it: Cyclone seat. Nobody sits there, the bartender announced to the room. Not tonight, not ever. That seat is reserved for the man who taught the devil how to burn. Miller looked at the empty stool, then at his own reflection in the mirror behind the bar. He looked different to himself. Smaller, perhaps, but realer. He had walked in looking for a fight to prove he was a man. He was walking out knowing he had just met a god. Outside, in the cool night air, Arthur Vance got into his beat-up Ford pickup truck. He looked at his wrist, the silver bracelet catching the moonlight. The shaking in his hands had stopped. He wasn't the Cyclone anymore. He was just Artie. And he was going home, knowing that the story, the truth, was safe for another generation. If you were moved by Master Chief Arthur Cyclone Vance's story of quiet courage, please like this video, share it with someone who respects our veterans, and subscribe to Silent Veterans for more stories of the unassuming heroes who walk among us.